Hey guys, welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Today I'm going to be reacting to Murder and Fascism, Rise of the Ustaše. I can't pronounce this, but yes, the Ustaše. Yeah, hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly. I'm sorry, guys. Between Two Wars, 1934, Part 3 of 4 by Time Ghost History. If you want to check out my previous reactions, remember the playlist card will be at the top. Just click on it and be able to access them. If you want to check out the original video as well as Time Ghost History's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. Okay, let's start. 3, 2, 1, go.
In 1934, the world witnesses the very public rise of a Croat terror organization in Yugoslavia that will eventually collaborate with the Nazis and commit hideous crimes against humanity during World War II. It is the Ustaše.
Ustaše, okay. Thank you, Indy Nidell. So we're back with Yugoslavia, all right.
Welcome to Between Two Wars, a chronological summary of the interwar years covering all facets of life, the uncertainty, hedonism, and euphoria, and ultimately humanity's descent into the darkness of the Second World War. I'm Indy Nidell. As we have seen, the 1930s is a decade where rulers across the world try to mold their countries and subjects into their own worldviews. Hitler approaches it by creating a state within a state that then proceeds with the total Nazification of Germany. In the Soviet Union, Stalinist economic policy attempts to transform the economy via a revolution from above. Both approaches start with an underground extremist political movement centered on political violence. In the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, this will all come together in fateful combination for a monarch who has done everything he can to forcefully unify a quarreling nation, often paralyzed by ethnic conflict. That monarch is King Alexander I, who, as we saw in our previous episode on Yugoslavia, had done away with the parliamentary system and made himself dictator.
And he's trying to keep this Yugoslavia dream alive, alone, in terms of him being a dictator. And you know, the more you force on this issue, the harder it will become for anyone to accept it. You know, the more the government forces on this Yugoslavia agenda, the more the people are just going to separate further away from each other. And you know, it's inevitable, really, what's happening there during that time. And it's just, it's sad, but it's also not really sad per se, you know.
Effort to forge a single Yugoslav identity and put an end to the tribal divisions that he thought were destroying his country. One of the most radical changes he introduces is the Banovina system, which reorganizes the kingdom into 9 new provinces which carefully ignore ethnic boundaries or old borders. He couples this reorganization with the suppression of his opponents. And as the 1930s begin, Alexander and his prime minister, Petar Zivkovic, appear to have...
Why does the prime minister look more royalty looking than the king himself? I mean, look at the prime minister with all of that regalia on him, but then you look at the king and he's just looking like a politician. Yeah.
Everything under control. Vladko Maček, leader of the now banned Croat Peasant Party, HSS, is safely in jail and awaiting trial because of his alleged involvement with a separatist bomb plot. Svetozar Pribicevic, a Democrat and a leading opposition voice, is under virtual house arrest in Serbia. The illegal Communist Party is under constant police surveillance, and the other opposition leaders are lying low. But there is an undercurrent of resentment felt by many of the king's subjects. When Maček and over 20 other defendants go on trial in April 1930, it quickly turns into a public fiasco. Many of the defendants retract previous confessions, claiming that they were extracted under torture. Maček and his legal team deny the charge of separatism, but also openly denounce the proceedings as an act of propaganda. Maček and 7 co-conspirators are acquitted. 13 others receive jail sentences, And the accusations of torture leave a bitter aftertaste with much of the Croat public. Conscious that this can easily trigger tribal loyalties, Aleksandar and Zivkovic moved to mobilize popular support. They seed a new regime-friendly grassroots movement amongst Croat peasants to supplant the influence of the HSS. With the help of Karla Kovacevic, former vice president of the HSS, they create the Yugoslav Peasant Movement, with almost weekly pro-Yugoslavian mass rallies throughout Croatia.
I don't know if this is going to work, but, they're trying. They're trying anything and everything, every trick in the book, to try and keep this country intact. But, yeah.
They fund cultural organizations to publish journals and calendars and run libraries and archives that promote the Yugoslav idea. And they make sure that any resistance is held in check by an efficient police state. As soon as Aleksandar seized power, he had enacted several laws to create a new security apparatus primed to monitor and pressure any potential political threats. Anyone who wants to hold a public meeting, right? They have to request permission 3 days in advance. They have to provide the authorities an agenda for the meeting. And they have to accept the presence of a police agent who has the power to disperse the meeting immediately if he deems it unlawful. Special courts are set up to deal with any acts of treason. Control over the press is tightened, with state censors given significant power to ban anything which might threaten the regime.
Like, really, every trick in the book. Every trick in the book. I think Aleksandar and his prime minister and their government are just so desperate to find a way to make sure that people don't enter into their separatist cultural identities, and try and keep them into this Yugoslavia agenda. And like, literally, they are squeezing water. They are squeezing water, and the water is just going between their fingers. They just can't seem to get it. Every time they try and squeeze harder, the water just flows out of between their fingers. So it's tough. Yeah.
Their primary targets are stories about Croat-Serb disputes and economic difficulties. But the paranoia of authorities sometimes goes further. For example, an article on the Indian independence movement is censored out of a Croat paper for being an analogy for independence. Paranoia spreads through...
I guess you could say that. I mean, yes, the Indians are fighting for their own independence from Great Britain. So, yeah. It is an example. It is a goal that many people in the Yugoslavia also want. They want to be separate from the rest of the people that consider themselves Yugoslavian. They want to identify themselves behind their religion or culture or tribal identity. Yeah.
State security institutions. Thousands of politicians are monitored daily, every minute detail of their lives recorded. But even fairly apolitical citizens draw the spying eye of the state. Choral groups are disbanded by authorities if they are unable to sing the Yugoslav national anthem. Teachers are monitored closely for any sign they are not wholly devoted to nationalist education. Denunciations are encouraged, with frequent cases of citizens accusing one another of insulting the king or displaying tribal symbols. It checks organized resistance for now, but the colossal effort burdens a regime that soon seems to be running out of steam. Aleksandar and Zivkovic are kind of running out of ideas. In the first year of the dictatorship, 163 new laws introduced significant changes, but already by 1930, only 1 or 2 acts of relevant legislation could be considered substantial. Not a big deal if they would so far be successful in cementing their goal of Yugoslavism, right? But that is hardly the case. The countless rallies by Kovacevic's Yugoslav peasant movement have not really managed to engage the Croat peasants for Yugoslavism. They dismiss participants and speakers as sycophant opportunists. By 1931, the movement is already fading into insignificance. Muslims in the Bosnia and Herzegovina region are also suspicious of the regime. They resent its tendency to view Islam as a barrier to further integration. While authorities make concerted efforts to intervene in religious matters, they fail to or decline to investigate reported cases of discrimination and abuse by state operatives.
Now, if people are not equal before the law, if they don't have the opportunity to access justice, you know, and it's only given to a select few people here or there, it's just further exacerbating the situation to say that, you know, this country doesn't respect me as an individual, it doesn't respect my community, it doesn't respect or even represent the future of my community and myself. So therefore I stick to my tribal identity, I stick to my people. I don't see people from Croatia or the Croatian region or the Slovenian region or anywhere else in Yugoslavia as my own people. I only have the people who I identify as my own people. So yeah, it just further exacerbates this thing. And yeah, it's just what it is. Nothing can be done so far.
Now, the common gripe among most non-Serbs is that Yugoslav Unitarianism is basically an unconvincing cover for Serb dominance, but many Serbs are also dissatisfied. King Alexander, viewed by the Serbs as their champion, has also taken away their political representation and democratic rights. Professors at the University of Belgrade fume at being forced to focus their lessons on Yugoslav history and literature instead of continuing to follow Serbian-based historiography and culture. Continued economic hardship doesn't help either. Agricultural prices, although taking slightly longer to fall than other southeastern European countries, have by now plummeted. Protectionist isolationism has gripped many industrialized foreign countries during the trade war launched by the American Smoot-Hawley Act in 1930. By 1934, Yugoslav exports have fallen by 58%. The German banking crisis of 1931 also impacts Yugoslavia. The Austrian bank, Kreditanstalt, whose collapse triggered the crisis in the first place, was the largest lender to Yugoslavia. As the domino effect topples bank after bank after bank, any alternatives are eliminated, and Yugoslavia's pool of credit dries up. That could be mitigated somewhat by German reparations, but the Hoover moratorium, which effectively ends Germany's reparations obligations, also cancels the annual payment of $16 million Yugoslavia receives. And as always, economic difficulties drive political decisions in a new direction. France is pressuring Alexander to return to democracy. When in 1931 they offer a badly needed loan under the condition of a new constitution, King agrees. But despite royal assurances, it is hardly a return to democracy.
I mean, if they did return to democracy, yes, people will be able to vote in the people who would represent them in the national legislature. But we've been down that road before. And there were deadlocks in their parliament because people were stuck on their tribalistic lines, and nothing could ever move or get done in the legislature. And then Alexander took over the whole entire situation. He closed down the parliament, he closed down any form of democracy, and became the dictator that we saw. So, unless if they can find a way to deal with that particular issue about the tribalistic identity lines, I'm afraid it's just not going to really, be any better. It would just be back to square one. Yeah.
The highest goal of Yugoslav unity is used to justify hugely restrictive regulations of the re-established parliamentary system. New electoral rules are designed to prevent any tribal or religious parties re-emerging. In practice, this means that no meaningful opposition can be elected at all. Candidates can only stand if they have support in every single one of the 306 electoral districts, and can only run if they are on a government-approved list. A Senate system is also introduced, but this is similarly restricted, with the king selecting half of the members personally and the loyal Banovina Council the rest. The first election is announced for November 8th, but only the government's party is allowed to stand.
You know, I'm just wondering, is there anyone else besides Alexandra and his prime minister and whoever else is in the prime minister's cabinet who actually want this Yugoslavia to work out? You know, because all we're hearing is the dictator himself and his prime minister, you know, or prime ministers, you know, whichever one is in office now, you know, trying to push for this Yugoslavian unity and identity and idea. But you don't see anyone else, any other form of politician or people who are also championing this, you know, this idea. And I think that's also an issue, because what if something happens to the prime minister or to Alexandra? Then who's next? Who's going to carry the baton to say, yes, we're going to continue on with this idea?
Elections proceed despite a joint statement from leaders of the former major parties, the Radicals, the Agrarians, the Democrats, the Slovene People's Parties, and the Yugoslav Muslim Organization, declaring that the new constitution has changed nothing. Maček and his HSS are not signatories, though. Instead, they author a leaflet calling on Croats to boycott the election. In the run-up to voting day, the state apparatus does everything it can to encourage participation. The press reminds readers that failure to vote is a betrayal of the millions who died for Yugoslavia in the Great War. Police also ramp up surveillance of any tribalist individuals and take action against anyone encouraging a boycott. Predictably, the government party wins the election. In December, it is given a name: Yugoslav Radical Peasant Democracy, a cumbersome amalgamation.
So they're only given the name after they won the elections. So before, what were these people? What was the organization called? This government, supported political party. What was it named?
Of the names of previous parties to provide some sense of continuity. But this effort to force unity soon backfires. Factions now start to emerge within the single party. Some Croat deputies grow increasingly rebellious and probe how far they can forward tribal interests and get away with it. Some of the Serb deputies start planning for a revival of the Radical Party. In April 1932, as things continue to deteriorate, the king forces Prime Minister Zivkovic to retire. His successor only lasts a couple of months and is replaced in July by Milan Srskić. But he won't really do much other than aggravate groups already resentful of the government. And resentful they are. Despite the lack of organized resistance, spontaneous peasant riots are frequent in 1932. In one incident near Ludbreg, 200 angry Croat peasants march along a country road to personally confront the governor of their Banovina, all while waving Croatian flags and singing nationalist hymns. Constitutional resistance re-emerges, frustrated by the lack of change. Ex-politicians from the Croatian Peasant Party, independent Democrats, and other federalist and even separatist groups draft the Zagreb Points in November 1932. The resolution condemns royal absolutism and demands a reorganization of the state with respect for autonomous interests. The resolution triggers similar demands from Slovene and Muslim leaders. The king does make a small concession, loosening electoral regulations somewhat. Other than this, however, nothing changes. No new elections are held, and Maček is again thrown into prison at the beginning of 1933. The other opposition leader, Prbicevic, had been freed from his internment in 1931 because of ill health and allowed to emigrate. Free from the risk of prison, he will now mount an intense campaign against Alexander's rule from abroad. But there are more sinister forces for Alexander on the horizon. There's always been another side to the Croat nationalism beyond the HSS and its constitutionalist policies. The most significant radical movement is the Croatian Party of Rights. Active since the mid-19th century, the Party of Rights espouses extreme Croat nationalism and anti-Serb feeling. Founded on the principle of a greater Croatia, many of its leaders have denied the existence of separate Serb, Slovene, and Bosnian Muslim nationalities altogether, seeing them instead as Croats corrupted by foreign influence. The Party of Rights has...
What? Uh, okay. The logic these people have here on this situation. Oh my gosh.
Never been able to build a mass movement, though, being sidelined by the charismatic Radic and his peasant following. Many no longer live in Yugoslavia, and the ones in the country have been operating underground since Alexander's dictatorship began. The more militant members, both at home and abroad, are now coalescing around Ante Pavelic. He is currently in exile, making connections with the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, the IMRO, a long-established militant movement for an autonomous Macedonia. Now, this has resulted in Pavelic being sentenced to death in absentia, which only heightens his radical credentials, right? Even before he left Croatia, though, Pavelic had set up a rudimentary paramilitary group and an underground newspaper. Now, a more forceful movement gains importance under Pavelic's leadership. Founded in 1930, it is called the Ustaše after the Croatian verb ustati, to rise up. Its constitution is released in 1932 and declares that the movement has the task to liberate Croatia under foreign yoke with all means, including an armed uprising, in order that it become a completely free and independent state on the whole of its historic ethnic territory.
And I'm wondering about the Croatian people, like the citizens, the civilians, those who are not interested in doing any of this activities of, becoming these freedom fighters or working for the Yugoslavian government, those who are just apolitical, what is their feeling about all of this? Did they feel as if maybe they should pick a side and decide to join one of them and, either defend this ideal that Alexandra has of Yugoslavia or continue on this agenda for, self-rule and an independent state of Croatia? I'm just wondering. Because it must have been really difficult for a lot of people. They're being tussled and pulled left and right to either choose this side or choose that side. If you don't choose this side, we'll kill you. If you choose that side, we'll arrest you, and probably you will be killed as well. So, it must have been very difficult.
Pavelic and the Ustaše find natural allies in the growing fascist movement throughout Europe. The Ustaše reject parliamentary democracy, espouse fundamentalist Roman Catholicism, have extreme nationalism as their ideological bedrock, and foster cults of violence and strong one-man leadership. In contrast to other fascists, Pavelic has no interest in mass politics. Instead, his movement is made up of a small and elite fighting force engaging in violent terrorism. A Ustaše insurgent, according to Pavelic, must be severe and merciless, without mercy and pardon, for his duty is to lessen the pain of the Croatian people with fire, iron, and blood.
How does that lessen? Okay. All right.
Crush with force the neck of the foreign parasite and so liberate his homeland. With this in mind, training camps are set up in Hungary and Italy, two powers with territorial claims against Yugoslavia.
Yeah, I remember in the previous episodes dealing with Yugoslavia, the neighbors of Yugoslavia smell blood in the water and they're eating this carcass that is Yugoslavia as much as possible. So of course they want to destabilize the situation in the country. They want to make sure that this country is further neutralized and broken up into pieces for them to take, and yeah, look, it has enemies internally, it has enemies externally, and the country, I would say, is basically entering into autopilot mode. Alexandra has been trying so many ideas with his prime ministers. They've been trying so many ideas. It just doesn't work. It just won't work. Yeah.
Who also provide a great deal of funding to the burgeoning group. From these camps, acts of terror are planned and executed. These primarily involve planting time bombs on trains to Yugoslavia to cause material destruction, fear, and chaos. In September 1932, a small uprising in the Lika region of Croatia is planned, with a police station being raided by Ustaše, but it is, however, quickly crushed, though it unnerves Yugoslav authorities who are unsure how powerful the movement is. By 1934, the Ustaše numbers 600 members. All are well trained and fanatically committed to an independent Croatia. Throughout all this unrest, resentment, terrorist fermentation, Alexander has slowly been retreating from public and domestic politics. Ruling is increasingly left to the JRSD, renamed the Yugoslav National Party, JNS, in July 1933.
Is he ill? Because in that picture, it just didn't look like he was healthy. It looked like he was looking depressed or something. I don't know, maybe he's ill. Yeah.
Whose ministers and loyal press largely managed to keep the king placated as he focuses on foreign policy. Local elections in October 1933 are once again profoundly undemocratic, but this time also exceptionally mishandled. Government ministers make no effort to be subtle in the intimidation of voters and manipulation of results. The king takes the ministers' assurances that the results demonstrate his nation is happy. In the aftermath of the election, a British diplomat laments that the only person in the kingdom fooled by the election is the king himself.
Yeah, he has basically given up. He's on autopilot mode. You know, the head of state is on autopilot mode, the government is on autopilot mode, and the people are also on autopilot mode. Everyone is just going on as if nothing is going on, as if everything is okay. You know, as if everything that they're doing is, you know, what is right. So, yeah, he will believe what he wants to believe, sadly.
And it does seem that both the king and his government fail to see any danger at this point. In the wake of the chaotic elections, the British consul in Zagreb reports that every section of the population of Slovenia and Croatia cordially hates the Belgrade government and bitterly resents the failure of the monarch to attempt to remedy the situation. On a royal visit to Zagreb to celebrate his birthday, December 16th, authorities foil a Ustaše assassination plot. The police only tell Alexander about this the following day. He reacts pretty calmly, actually, and decides to stay in the city as planned until December 26th. As 1934 rolls around, Yugoslavia simply seems to be adrift. Srskić resigns as prime minister in January and is replaced by Nikola Uzonovic, who continues the same policy of issuing the same Unitarian slogans, the same Unitarian policies, and the same police oppression and repression that has been the order of the day since 1929. But change seems to be in the air. On the advice of France, Alexander has softened government relations with the HSS. Indeed, just before embarking on a visit to France on a diplomatic mission, he tells a confidant that upon his return, I will do everything that is necessary to form a royal government from all former political groups or parties, respectively, which have until now been in opposition. But he will never be able to make this happen. He arrives at the French port of Marseille on October 9, 1934. The king and the French foreign minister ride through streets flocked with onlookers and cameras. A gunman leaps forward, shooting at the king and the minister. Alexander dies instantly, victim of one of the first assassinations captured on film.
And was he like the first head of state to be assassinated in a foreign country? I mean, this is amazing. Wow. Oh, wow. And since there was like a crowd, you know, waiting for them and greeting them and waving hands and everything, that means, you know, Alexandra was quite famous, I would say, in France. You know, people liked him, or they liked their prime minister and the fact that, or should I say, the president of France, and you know, they are there just to support these two heads of state. I'm not sure, but maybe he was well liked in France as well, Alexandra.
The attack is carried out by Vlado Chernozemski, a member of the IMRO and an instructor at a Ustaše camp in Hungary. In fact, the assassination is a joint effort from the two anti-Yugoslav terrorist groups. Chernozemski tries to flee the scene, but is cut down by a police saber, shot in the head, and then savagely beaten by the crowd.
The crowd is infuriated. The police can't hold them. It's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Pandemonium has broken loose.
An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Hey, this is sad. Yeah, this is just sad. So now, who picks up the baton? Like I said, now that he is dead, who is going to continue on this dream? I don't think there's anyone. I don't even think the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, will have any kind of political weight to do anything now, you know?
The mob is out to beat the man to death. They'll do it too.
Somehow he survives and is taken for interrogation. He dies later that evening. 3 Ustaše members have traveled with Chernozemski to support his effort. They are also unable to escape and are arrested. Surprisingly, and despite government fears, ethnic violence does not flare up in reaction to the king's death. In fact, Alexander's body first comes to Zagreb to lie in state and is visited by an estimated 200,000 Croats. Yugoslav flags fly at half-mast across the entire kingdom. His grand funeral takes place in Belgrade, and some nationalist firebrands are even released from prison to attend proceedings.
This is grandstanding. You know, all this time these people have been fighting for their own identity and, you know, their own tribal lines. You know, they've been fighting so long for it. Just because he's dead, it's not going to change anything, really. This is just for photo ops, just to say, oh, yes, he was a good man. You know, he tried to fight for Yugoslavia, you know, fighting it for it to be a one nation and stuff like that. But in the end, we all know where this is heading with many of these politicians. You know, a politician is a politician, guys. Yeah.
One Slovene politician is quoted as saying that everything else is forgotten and that we ought to work and live for Yugoslavia.
Everything else is forgotten for that day, because it's the funeral of this king of Yugoslavia. Once he's dead, once he's buried and they've put the tombstone, we're back to business.
Maček is also freed in December and similarly appeals for unity. Foreign leaders also pay their respects. Hermann Goering from Germany and Philippe Pétain from France solemnly attend the event. But it is not over. Instead, Alexander's death has put an end to any unification process. The rest of the decade will see further stratification along ethnic lines, the continued influence of fascist ideology, and growing public apathy. In 1941, when the Nazi war machine turns to the east, Pavelić and the Ustaše will join them, grow into an army, and proceed to subjugate, oppress, incarcerate, and murder hundreds of thousands of Serbs, Yugoslav Jewish, Roma, and Sinti men, women, and children. If you haven't seen our first 2 installments on interwar Yugoslavia, you can watch them right here. Our Time Ghost Army member this week is Douglas Graham. Thanks to people like Douglas, we are able to continue making quality historical content such as this. So do the right thing and join us at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. Subscribe, ring the bell, and remember, King Zog's back from holiday, Marie Luprescu's gray, and Alexander is dead in Marseille. Cheers.
Okay, guys, that's it with Murder and Fascism, Rise of the Ustaše Between Two Wars, 1934, Part 3 of 4 by Time Ghost History. Yes, the king, the dictator, Alexander, he was the only thing that was keeping this country unified in some sort of way. Yes, it didn't work out. You know, he tried many things. He tried to use his authority and his military or police strength to try and keep this country together. And for a time it was working, but still there was a lot of cracks, and he couldn't cover them all with his hands. He couldn't cover them all with his people, like people like the Prime Minister and his cabinet. They couldn't put out all the fires that were occurring in the country. And yeah, like I said, there was no one else that was going to carry his baton. There's no one else who was talking on the unity ideal. There was no one else who was talking about a one Yugoslavia. All the other politicians were just out for their own cultural identities and their own tribal lines. And what made it even worse is that not everyone was equal before the law. Democracy was non-existent. Everything was orchestrated by the government to make it seem as if there was some sort of democracy. And the police state was very heavy-handed in the country. People had to notify the police about what kind of meeting they're going to be having. There has to be a police officer attending that meeting to make sure that things are lawful. And yeah, I'm still wondering about the people of the former Yugoslavia. Before that country shattered into the pieces that we see in our modern time. Like during that time, you would have those who would support the ideal of Yugoslavia, and you would have those who support the ideal of separation and independency and stuff like that. But those in between, those people who are apolitical, those people who don't necessarily have a side that they pick, how were they feeling? Whether they were Serbs, whether they were Croatians or Bosnians or anyone else in Yugoslavia, how did they feel about all of this? Did they feel like as if they were powerless? They couldn't really do anything. They can't say anything, because these two sides have really become extreme in a way, and yeah, it's just unfortunate, really. It's just unfortunate, but ultimately it's the will of the people that must decide what happens. And later on in the future, we know what happens. In the present day, we know what happened to Yugoslavia. It's no longer there. It's separate nations now, and who knows, maybe one day they will come back. Maybe one day they'll never ever will come back, and it will just be a distant memory. It will just be something for the history books and continue being for the history books. But yeah, ultimately it's for the people in that region to decide what kind of future do they want, and it cannot be imposed on them like how Alexandra wanted to do it. It can't be imposed on them like how the government was also trying to make this Yugoslavia dream a reality. Yeah, ultimately it's the will of the people. What do they want? Guys, that's it for today. Remember, if you want to check out the original video as well as Time Goes History's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos, and I'll see you guys next week, Tuesday, hopefully. These power outages are really stressing me out. Okay, bye bye.